Nehemiah chapter 5, and we're in verse number 9. Now recall the setting that we've looked at. Nehemiah is standing there in one of the assemblies, and there began to be a great cry. The wives were crying, the husbands were crying, the children were crying. Why were they crying? Anybody remember? Right. They were going in hock to pay taxes and to buy food. Now, of course, remember the families that were there couldn't go out and take the time to plant because they were building what? Building the wall and building the temple. So the crews couldn't go out and spend time preparing the land and planting crops and tending to the crops and all that while they're doing their chores for the city. So some of the greedy ones, or the rich nobles of the land, began to say, okay, I'll loan you some money. And of course it trapped them into a cycle where they ended up having to give their sons or daughters into bondage or service for the debt that they owed. They mortgaged their land and began to lose their land and began to lose their sons and daughters. Now what would that do for you? Yeah, that's why this great cry comes up here in verse 1. So Nehemiah now is dealing with that situation. He's found out, in verse number 6 says, and I was very angry when I heard their cry in these words. Now Nehemiah got upset, didn't he? Okay, but it was a righteous anger. He didn't go out and blow up the rich's houses or burn them down or anything like that. He confronted the rich with this situation, right? And what we're looking at now, verse 9, is the confrontation that he is having now with the rich. Verse number 9 says, also I said, it is not good that ye do. So what's he doing? Right, he's rebuking them, right? He said, this isn't good. It's not right what you're doing. He said, ought ye not to walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the heathen, our enemies? He said, what this conduct is doing is causing a reproach outside the walls. They're laughing at us and laughing at God because you guys are getting rich. And it's always interesting how some people can just make money, ain't it? But the problem is they're making money on the backs of the poor people. People didn't have a lot. They had their land by title because it was theirs from the tribal allotments from Joshua's time. They had that land. But sometimes when they took a mortgage on the land, they'd lose that land for how long? 7 years. All right, then the Jubilee would come, and all the servants that were in debt and indentured, and all of the land that was sold in mortgage goes back and reverts back to the original owners. So they're taking advantage of this situation, and Nehemiah calls them out and he says, this ain't good. What you do is not good. And he says, the Jews which were, let me go in here and read it again. It says, to walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the heathen, our enemies. I likewise, and my brethren, and my servants might exact of them money and corn. I pray you, let us leave off this, see what he calls it? Usury. Now, what's usury? Anybody know that word? Yeah, have you ever heard of what do they call those guys gambling? I don't forgot the word now. The guys that make money, that charge you double or triple and all that. Bookmakers, that kind of. But they're what they do is they charge exorbitant interest rates for their money. Like a normal bank is going to charge you what the going rate is, okay, which is reasonable. That's not unreasonable. Usury is over and above what would be reasonable.
Oh, like a loan shark.
Right, like a loan shark. That was the word I couldn't think of. I was thinking shark, but I couldn't remember loan shark. All right? You go to a loan shark, he's going to charge you 50 to 100% interest on your loan. And that gets compounded. So you end up owing more from the interest than you do from the original loan for the money you received. So usury is spoken against, and the Lord commands them not to have usury, not to do usury. It's wrong because it takes advantage of people. But now these rich people take an opportunity to say, hey, we can make some money here. And started hitting them heavy with the interest on the mortgages and all of that. Remember now, the people are busy. They don't have time for all that. They don't have time to go out and plant food. They don't have time to pay taxes. They're working. They're working to get their city safe again. So, they should have been getting some slack, but no, you got to pay. So the pressure is on these little people, we would say, the poor people. And they cry out to Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah was unaware of it. He didn't know they'd started doing that. So he says, it's not good. He got angry, but he kept his anger in check and made wise decisions. All right? So Nehemiah says, look, you are causing the enemy to blaspheme God because of what you're doing to your own people. Think about that. This isn't the enemy doing it to them. It's their own people from within doing this to them. So that is causing a reproach to God by the enemy, saying, look at them chewing each other up. Look at them devouring each other. Now remember, the enemy is always watching. And that's a reminder to us, the devil's always watching. Somebody's always watching you. Some lost person somewhere is always watching you for when you mess up. You think about it, the devil always has somebody watching you. So don't forget that. When you're out there in your Christian life, trying to serve the Lord, be careful to be a light, not a darkness to others, but a light to others, to shine forth Christ's light and behavior to others. They shouldn't be seeing things like this in the church. They shouldn't be seeing things like this in the communities. There should be that neighborly love that God commands us to have. So these rich people weren't showing that love, were they? They were showing the profit. They wanted them big fat purses. They wanted all that gold and silver that they could get, and they're getting it, but at the expense of the others. So people are losing their land, and they're having to sell their sons or daughters into servitude. Now think about the sons and the daughters, how they felt. Mom and Daddy couldn't pay taxes, so here I am. I'm a slave. For 7 years, I'm a slave. So it wouldn't be very good. And think what it did to the young people then during that time that got indentured. Okay? So it would affect them the rest of their lives. And that's why this cry is going up. And Nehemiah is going to take action about it. And he says in verse 9, also I said, it is not good that ye do. Ought ye not to walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the heathen, our enemies? He said, shouldn't you be afraid that you're causing a reproach to God? Don't you think you should be wiser than that, than to tempt God, to cause a reproach upon God's name because you're doing this? And that's exactly what they're doing. They're sinning against the people, and they're causing that reproach against God and God's people. So Nehemiah here is confronting these rulers, these rich people, and he's confronting them in public before this crowd. This isn't no back closet deal here. This is right out in public. Nehemiah is having to deal with this in front of the congregation. So you can't hide nothing. It's all going to be out in public. So now look what he does next in verse 10. He says, I likewise and my brethren and my servants might exact of them money and corn. All right? In other words, Nehemiah as governor had the right to get taxes, didn't he? He had the right to a salary. He had the right for them to provide him a place. He had a right for them to pay for everything. But he didn't exercise it. He didn't take a salary. He didn't take advantage of that. So he was not indebted to anyone, and he wasn't causing a burden on anyone like these others. He said that my servants might exact of them money and corn. I pray you, let us leave off this what? Usury. There it is. Okay? Let's quit this. Let's not charge usury anymore. And that's exactly, it's not usury, it's usury. That's how you're supposed to say it. Usury. All right? So now Nehemiah comes up with the plan and he says, look, stop it. Let's stop this. And look what the response is. Verse number 11. Restore, I pray you, to them even this day their lands, their vineyards, their olive yards, and their houses, also the 100th part of the money and of the corn, the wine, and the oil that ye exact of them. And he says, don't give them all the money back because it was necessary. You did have a business to take care of, but only keep back 100th of the price you charged them. Wow, that's a big cut, isn't it? All right? 100th of all that you've taken from them. Give them their houses back, give them their lands back, give them their gardens, their vineyards, and all that stuff back, and only keep back 100th of what you've taken from them. That's the solution. Now, what's that going to do for them rich people? They hurt them exactly where it should, right in the pocketbooks where they've been taking advantage of people. So now you can understand now this is going to create some hardship between Nehemiah and these rich people, isn't it? He's not going to be so popular as he was before. But Nehemiah doesn't care about that. What he cares about is doing the Lord's work. He's not there for popularity. He's not there to be a great shining leader that's going to get to be king over Jerusalem. That ain't his purpose of being there. He's governor of Jerusalem, and he had a right to be there. He was commanded to be there by the king, and he had a right to tell them what to do. But notice what he does. He said, you should not be doing this bad. You need to give them their stuff back. All right? Now look at verse 12. Then said they, now who are the they?
Loan sharks.
Right, the loan sharks. We will what? What's that mean? All right, we're going to give it back. All right? And we'll require nothing of them. We don't even want that 100th back. We're going to give it back to them. So will we do as thou sayest. All right? Right out in public, they said, we'll give it back. We'll give them all their money back. Instead of the 100th, we'll just go ahead and give them that. Because they're rich. They can afford it. All right? So now you can imagine, this is these guys that have been charging usury behind the curtain. Now they're exposed. Now they're embarrassed. Now they're caught doing what they've been doing. And this is going to boil up eventually. But Nehemiah, he said, he doesn't trust them. Nehemiah says, well, it's easy to say it. It's quite another thing to make an oath to it and sign what you're saying. And that, look what he says in the rest of the verse here. Then I called the priests and took an oath of them that they should do according to this promise. See what he says? He got an official contract drawn up with the priests as witnesses. God's people, God's men, witnessed them signing this document that said they would restore everything. Now, obviously, Nehemiah's got a little sense. Verbal promises ain't much count when it comes to the rich people. They have to have signed, sealed contracts. And Nehemiah reversed it on him and said, well, I need a signed, sealed contract that that's what you're going to do. And they had to sign it in front of everybody. And that would cause him problem for the rest of his future here. And even when he went back to Persia, them old rich people would be complaining about him. But you know what? Nehemiah still got that wall built. Nehemiah did his job according to what he was allowed to do, and according to God's call in his life. He served God, and he served the people, and then he went back to Shushan, the Persian palace. So what a blessing it is to have faithful men, strong men, willing to take a stand for God's principles, willing to take a stand for the people, willing to stand up and say, what you're doing is wrong. He said, I could have took a salary. I've not been taking one. They'd been feeding him, yes. Obviously, you got to feed somebody that's there helping you. They've been feeding him and take care of him. Remember, he's working too. He's not just standing around giving orders. He's working. He's supervising. He's going about. Him and his, he had an aide that was with him, a servant that was going to have the trumpet to blow in case of an alarm. He was walking around on sentry duty just like the rest of them. So he had earned his salary, but he didn't take a salary. That's interesting, isn't it? He wasn't there for profit and he wasn't there for money. He was there for God. And as he did that, God blessed him for his faithfulness and helped him to get this wall built, which is what his purpose was there to do. So God blessed him and kept him safe. And now he's got the rich people under oath to provide for exactly what they said they would do. Said, we're not going to require anything of them. We're going to give their money back. We're going to get their lands back, their vineyards, and all of that. We're even going to give them their money back. Now, you know, that would take a bite out of them. They thought they had stuffed their pockets full. Now they're going to have to empty out them pockets. And you think about that, that's going to rub some people raw, and they're going to remember this. They're going to remember that. Nehemiah, look what you made us do. We didn't want to do that, but you made us do it. Well, Nehemiah didn't make them do it. They did it out in public. What they did behind closed doors came out in public. And that's what you need to remember. These backdoor deals that you're doing, they'll come out. The Lord will bring this to people's attention. The Lord will call it out to expose what it is that's going on. So things that are done in secret often with the Lord's people will be revealed, especially those that are doing wrong. God will call them out. God will show them the error of their ways, show them their sin, and have them deal with the issues of sin. So here these rich people have sinned against the people. They should have been doing that. Everybody should have been sharing. Everybody should have been doing what was right. Even we've seen where the goldsmiths and the silversmiths and those kind of people were doing the work too. And you no doubt that they were rich, but they were helping too. And all of these nobles, most of the nobles' sons and daughters and all of them were working too. We've read that on the wall. So it should have been a joint effort where everybody got along, everybody shared what they had. If you didn't have food, you could go ask somebody, sure, I'll give you some food, and give them the food. That's a Christian principle, by the way, that we help our neighbors as ourselves, that we love them as ourselves. Our Lord gave us that command in the New Testament to love God with all our heart, all our mind, body, soul, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. So with those commands in place and God's commands in the Old Testament, God's 10 commandments, they should have been being good to their neighbors. But they got greedy, they saw a situation, saw an opportunity, and they took advantage of it. And they have begun to place the children in indentured servants, and they were suffering. The people cried out because of this process that they were going through. They couldn't win. You think about it, the poor people couldn't win. They were being taxed, and they couldn't grow their own food, so they had to buy food. They didn't have money to buy food, so they had to go borrow money, and then it's just a vicious cycle. It would just end up with nothing. The children would be in service, and they wouldn't have anything to work for, would they? So Nehemiah sets this straight. He calls them to the carpet, you might say. And he puts them out right on that public platform, on that public stage, and says, what you're doing, it ain't right. It's no good. You're causing a reproach to God, and you're going to have to fix this. What are you going to do? All right? So when that happens, these rich people have to respond, and they know that if they don't respond in the right way, they're going to have some trouble. Okay? They're going to catch some trouble. So they do that which is right because their hands are forced to, but they were the ones that had done this behind the scenes. So you have to kind of watch them now. And Nehemiah won't be able to take it back, turn his back to them. He's going to have to watch out for them and realize that he may have made more enemies than just the ones outside the walls. He may have made some enemies on the inside. But sometimes when sin is going and doing its thing, we need to call attention to it. And we need to stop it. No matter how big or how little, we need to call attention to it and get it stopped and deal with it quickly before it festers. Like that root of bitterness is just going to keep growing and growing and growing, snowballing, I call it, down the mountain. That snowball starts out little. Well, how does it end up down on the mountain, down in the valley? Big, huge snowball that can take out trees. So think about that. Here we should learn from these lessons. Don't take advantage of people when they're down and out. Don't be stomping them to death and taking everything they've got. Show them love. Do what you can for people. Help them as much as humanly possible. Give them what they need, and you will be rewarded for it by God helping keep you safe and to get these walls built around you where you can have the safety and the liberty you need to be successful in this new occupation back in your home country. So think about that. Let's all remember these principles. All right, let's all stand.